So, how did I become conservative? Coming right up. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Common Sense, Logic, and Reason. And as always, I want to say thank y'all for joining me today. So, it's clear that I'm conservative. You know, this is definitely a conservative channel about conservative common sense, the same common sense principle that you often hear from conservatives. But I wasn't always a conservative. Like any typical black person in America, I was born and raised into this, Democrats good, Republicans bad mentality. The Democrats care for black people. They care about the poor people. They care about justice. And Republicans only care about their greedy, rich white friends. Well, that turns out to be a flat out lie. But again, as a child, you're basically influenced by your parents, you're influenced by your environment and the people around you. And generally, if you don't know anything, you'll fall for anything. So when I knew absolutely nothing, I considered myself a Democrat and a person on the left, and I voted for Democrats. Well, as I became more educated, that definitely changed. Now, what happened to me, my story is, I started working for a parking garage around like 2001, something like that. And this was an overnight job. And that particular job I held was very, it wasn't a labor intensive job. It was a very laid back job. Most of what I did there, I did within like the first 30 minutes of getting there. Then the rest of the night was just cruise control. But I would do multiple different things, listen to music, bring a Game Boy or something like that. But I started listening to the radio. And this was around the time when the second Gulf War started. And I found a radio station in the New Orleans market that basically gave 24 hours. It was giving 24-hour coverage of the war. And I would listen to this station all the time just to keep up with what was going on in the war. And it was like 24 hours of war coverage. Now, once the war ended, they basically went back to their regular programming schedule. And it was a conservative station. I didn't know that there was such thing as a conservative station. And they will basically rebroadcast a lot of the conservative radio shows that they did during the daytime, such as Rush Limbaugh. Now, Rush Limbaugh is one of the people who I cite more as converting me, because that's the person that I heard from the most. And I was told that Rush Limbaugh was, as a kid, that he was this racist white man that believed that everything the Republicans do is right and everything the Democrats do is wrong. Of course, that's a flat out lie. Man, he was not a racist. He was just a white man who just told the honest truth and unapologetically. And if you're a white person and you do that, you're considered racist if you tell the conservative truth, not the leftist truth, because the leftist truth is what we believe, what you believe, what you feel. But he told the honest truth. And I would listen to him, and not just him, but other conservative people. They would say, just make a whole lot of points that just made sense. And they would just make this point that would just make sense. And I was like, that makes sense. Again, being a logical person, I'm all about the facts and the evidence and data. And then they would make another point that just made perfect sense. And then they would just make another point that would just make sense. And they would just keep making all of these points on top of points on top of points that just made perfect sense. And it only took me about maybe 2 months of listening, and I was full-fledged conservative. Now, a point that they made that I had no idea of was about the gun control. The Second Amendment. Growing up, I was always told that the Second Amendment was created because back then people had to hunt and fish to survive, and they needed guns to protect themselves. Well, if you read the Second Amendment, which I had never heard of, but if you read the Second Amendment, you will know that it has nothing to do with no hunting and fishing. It basically talks about well-regulated militias and preserving freedom and rights, and that the right of the people to own guns should not be ever rescinded. So people have the right to bear arms, not because of hunting and fishing, because of protection, and mostly against tyranny government, because this is what our fathers and fathers really fought against, to have liberty in America. So again, points like that just switched me over to being conservative, and I've been conservative ever since. This was back in roughly around 2003 or so, 2003. Once the second Gulf War was ending, is when I became, roughly around that time, after the war ended, that I became conservative. After listening to, people like the late Rush Limbaugh, and then also listening to other conservative people like Sean Hannity, who just really enforced it. And I became conservative back then, and honestly haven't looked back. And it was an extreme rarity back then, 2003, 2004, for a black person to be a conservative. And that's why I've always been accused, and still today, of being a racist white person by these butthurt blacks, as I just give them the facts. But black people are really truly starting to wake up now. I see more and more, YouTube channels of blacks starting to hear from the great Thomas Sowell, the late Walter E. Williams. I see videos of the late Milton Friedman, and just logic on top of reason, on top of evidence, on top of fact, on top of stuff that just makes sense. And more people are starting to wake up. I see I would say that's a blessing, especially when I see more and more black people, more channels speaking the truth and doing commentary on reaction on Thomas Sowell's video. You're starting to see more and more blacks wake up, and that's what we need. We need more and more Americans, because it's just insanity land with the leftists and what they believe in, what they feel, and you can identify as this and all this nonsense. But anyway, this is my story on how I became conservative. I became conservative and haven't looked back. Anyway, y'all, as always, until next time.